Yo, what is going on, guys? Today we're doing What the Shell. So this is actually a lot of fun because now we're going to start actually diving into what happens when we actually have control, which I think is really the most important. And then also I think it's important to understand the different types of shells and what a shell actually is, because a lot of people say, oh, I got a shell on the machine, but they don't know what that means. So that's what we're going to dive into today. Firstly, if you guys are liking the videos, go ahead and like and subscribe. I know we say it every freaking video, but it helps out a ton, and it's the only way to grow the channel, so we have to say it, right? Secondly, we only have 3 more boxes left in, I didn't know I had DayZ still open. We only have 3 more boxes left in this junior pen testing lab. This is one of the 3, so we're almost there. We're pretty much done with it. So once we're done with it, if you guys would like to see something specific, go ahead and drop it in the comments, and we'll go ahead and try and keep doing that. If not, let me know, and we'll just keep grinding. All right, so here we go. So what is a shell? So here it's going to give you really the nitty-gritty details about it, but really a shell is a way to interact with a remote machine. It doesn't have to be remote. You can have a shell on your own machine, but that's what we're using it for here. We're getting a command line interface on a machine. You can use Linux bash shell. You know, you guys are familiar with that. That's what you see a lot when we're running our commands. The other thing, Powershell on Windows, command line on Windows. Most people use Powershell now. I don't even know hardly anyone that uses cmd.exe except for to launch Powershell. But either way, it's important that you understand what tools you can use. And there's multiple different shells in Linux as well. That's outside the scope of this box, but there is a ton to know. So let's go ahead and dive in. So first thing, this is a very informational box, okay? This does not have many examples. There's a bunch of examples at the end, but I'm not going to do them for you because they don't require questions and answers. They're just for you to mess around with, and I want you guys to mess around with them. That's the whole point. You guys are going to practice them. If they had questions that you might have trouble finding the answers and stuff like that, then I would do them, but I'm purposely leaving them out so that you guys have to go in there and mess with them. All right. These are just giving you information. All right, so first off, the tools. This is super important. We've done most of these tools already in this pen testing path, but it's important that you guys understand them. So obviously Netcat, we've used it before. SoCat, we haven't used on this before, but we're going to use it. Metasploit multi-handler, we've used it. We literally used it last box, I believe. So first off, Netcat, they call it the Swiss Army knife of networking. Why? Because it can perform all kinds of network interactions. So it can do a bunch of stuff. It can banner grab. If you guys have never seen that, it's very interesting to know how to do it. We've done banner grabbing on this channel, but we haven't done it using Netcat, I don't believe. So we used other tools. But you can receive reverse shells. That's what you see it mostly used for nowadays, and that's what we've used it for, is to receive reverse shells. And we'll show you kind of what that is. Here's the problem with Netcat. Netcat shells are very unstable, easy to lose. What does that mean for us, right? It means we could be working on something, we could have control of a box, and all of a sudden that shell crashes, and we lose control of the box, and then it no longer works. Or we could be using it, blah, 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 having a good time, getting our information, all of a sudden the box actually crashes, meaning the actual machine restarts or something like that. That service crashes. They're very unstable. They're unpredictable. You could be in a machine for 5 minutes, and you could be in the exact same machine again for 5 hours and have 2 completely different results. So just keep in mind that Netcat, very unstable. Typically, you'll see on almost every box when someone gets a Netcat listener, their first thing they're going to try and do is they're going to try and pivot that or get a better shell, a more stable shell, depending on how they want to do that. All right, so SoCat, it's like Netcat on steroids. Just think of it as steroid Netcat. All right, it's the same as Netcat, but can do so much more. It's got a much harder syntax to learn, but that's neither here nor there. You don't have to memorize any syntax, in my opinion. I hate that thought process of, well, you don't know the syntax for that, you don't know how to use a tool. That's incorrect, in my opinion. I don't memorize syntaxes because I can find them. I can look them up. So if I use a tool once, I go, oh, and it's a great tool like SoCat, perfect. Write it down. I have a list of tools. SoCat's on that list. Boom, SoCat does this. That's what I'm going to use, and I can look up the syntax. I don't have to memorize every syntax in the world. It's just not realistic. Gary called me a simp because I took yesterday off to go to to have Valentine's Day with my girlfriend. All right, so here we go. Here's the two big catches. The syntax is more difficult. We just covered that. And Netcat is installed on virtually every machine. SOCAT is very rarely installed. Now, why is this a problem? Because a lot of you are going to say, "What? I don't understand why that's a problem," because you could just download it, right? Well, the problem is if you're trying to use SOCAT on a remote machine and it's not installed on that machine, it's not going to work, okay? Netcat comes on most boxes, meaning on most Linux distros. So what that means is if I'm attacking a Linux Apache server or something like that, right? If I'm attacking that, I know Netcat's on that box. So I can actually start a reverse shell on that box, or a reverse listener, excuse me. I can actually start the listener on that box if I can get control, and then I can just connect to it and anytime I want. So you can keep a persistent shell open with Netcat on a remote machine, and we're going to cover that stuff. But it's just important to understand that SOCAT is a great tool, but it has limitations. Netcat, great tool, but has limitations. Metasploit multi-handler, great tool, has limitations. So we're going to you have to know which tool you're using at which time. On the multi-handler Metasploit, our last box was literally on this, so I'm not going to get crazy talking about this, but you can see here, it can give you a fully fledged way to obtain stable shells. Okay, perfect. Here's the problem too, or the good thing is you can use it with Meterpreter, which we know. The problem is with Metasploit's multi-handler, in my opinion, is you have to create them with Msf Venom. You don't have to, but you're not going to get a Meterpreter session if you make your own payload, or excuse me, your own reverse shell, and then you just use multi-handler to reach back and get it. You're going to get just a regular shell, which is fine, but you're not going to get the stability that you're getting with their staged payloads, which is what they're talking about. With all of Metasploit and Meterpreter's entire tool set, you're going to get very stable connections as long as you're using a good payload. If you're using a payload that has a very poor rating, you probably won't get a very good shell. But all right, so aside from the tools we've covered, there's web shells. So these are extremely good resources they're giving you here. Payloads, all the things. Pentest Monkey, you're going to hear that probably a million times when you're going through YouTube and scouring, looking for this information. Pentest Monkey is very well known as having reverse shells, just one-liners that you can just copy and paste, boom, boom, and they're amazing. In my opinion, they're really good. They're the best out there. Now, Payloads, all things, great too. It's all dependent upon what you're doing and if you know how to manipulate them in a way. Because when I say that is you might have a reverse shell that's written very well, but you have to change certain things in it, and you might make the mistake. It might be a good reverse shell that's already written for you, but you may make the mistake of changing the syntax or something like that, and therefore it's not a reflection of that, it's a reflection of yourself. So keep that in mind, that just because something's not working doesn't mean that it was poorly written. All right, the seclist repo, primarily used for wordless, also contains very useful codes for obtaining shells. So just another asset, another tool. All right, so here we go. Types of shells, excuse me. There's two types of shells. We have reverse shells and we have bind shells. So reverse shells are what we've focused on so far. It's what you've seen, where we set up a listener on our machine and we say, hey, reach back and connect to us, right? Okay, cool. It reaches out, connects to us. Now we have communication. We're talking. Bind shells are a little different. It's when code executed on the target is used to start a listener. So what that means is I actually sent that machine a command to start their Netcat. So let's say I actually could get remote code execution and I'm getting a really crappy shell. I could actually send it and say, hey, run this for me. And when it runs that, it actually opens that up, that port, and says, yeah, connect to me whenever you want. Now, whenever I want, I just connect in, and boom, I have communication. Now, that's a persistent communication, meaning I can disconnect, I can go off and do something, and then I can connect again and do it. Now, as long as the machine hasn't been restarted, that has to be set differently. But either way, the bind shells are very good because it looks as though they're asking for connections, right? It's not going to it's not going to look as bad. The problem with it, with bind shells, is what's going to happen is you're going to probably get prevented by firewalls quite a bit. And the reason for that is because firewall rules, or ACLs, access control lists, are literally written to where it's going to say, okay, port 443 we're using for HTTPS. Port 80 is HTTP, so on and so forth. Those are written, and the rest are going to be deny everything else. So what that means is, even though that computer might say, hey, yeah, connect to me on port 1234, right? You're going to hit that firewall first, and the firewall is going to say, nope, port 1234 is not on our list, not on our access control list. See ya, we're blocking it. So that's why you got to be careful with bind shells, because you might have it working and it might open on your target, but the firewall might prevent you. So hopefully that makes sense to you guys, and you understand the limitations with both. All right, so reverse shell example. I'm not going to get caught up on some of the syntaxes here, but I am going to cover what they do and things like that. So again, 9 times out of 10, this is what you're going for in CTF challenges like Try Hack Me, because if you think about it, in a real pen test, you're going for information, right? You don't know what that information is yet, because it could be social security numbers, it could be credit card numbers, it could be HIPAA information. You're trying to figure out what is vulnerable, right? Well, now on CTF or anything like Try Hack Me, Hack the Box, that stuff, they have to give you a target. If they don't, okay, you broke the box, now what? There's no information on it because it's a test machine. So you have to have something to go for. That's why they're saying 9 times out of 10, you're going to be going for things like this. All right, so on the attacking machine, this sudo netcat lvnp 443, you're going to see this all the time when you're learning hacking in general. So sudo, obviously we know sudo gives us admin rights basically. NC stands for netcat. That's our netcat listener. We're starting it up. Now tac L stands for listen. Then V stands for verbose. And then the 443 obviously is the port. You're not gonna see that all the time. You're not gonna see port 443. And then I know they cover it, so I'm trying to not get too far ahead of ourselves here. I noticed when I started explaining what the syntax was that they actually say it here in a minute, so I didn't want to cover it and then, I think it's down here, and then have to cover it again. Yeah, so we'll cover it when we get there. I don't want to jump ahead, guys, sorry. All right, so here's our, our attacking machine, so this would be what I'd run on my machine. And then on the target, since it's a Linux machine, I know they have Netcat installed, hence before when we had SOCAT versus Netcat. Here's the difference. If I can run this on the target, so let's say something as simple as, and I know this sounds crazy, but this happens, guys. Let's say it's something simple as, I'm going to try and get into your work, okay? I'm just going to try and walk in. So I run this on my machine at home, okay? And I just have it sit there. And then I casually put on your work uniform. Let's say you work for AT&T or something. I'm not saying do this. I would never do this. And it's very illegal. But this happens. This type of stuff happens. So you put on their uniform, boom, boom, boom. You go to their work, and they let you in because you look like it. You sit down at a computer, and you run this command. Netcat, and then this is your IP and your port from home that you just did. Now you're doing the tac E. Tac E stands for execute, and you're going to execute bin bash, which is a bash shell. Now you get up, you walk away, you go home, and boom, you have a shell into their computer, and you don't have to be there anymore. Now, is that realistic? No, because if you have access to their machine like that, you're not going to just sit there, or you're not just going to run this simple little command and call it a day. But the point is, if you can get this to run, which is not very difficult if you have any sort of exploit, right? If you can get that to run, you get a reverse shell. Now the problem is, again, this isn't a very stable shell, so you may go home and it's not there. It was connected and you lost it already because it's not very stable. So that's what we need. We need to kind of keep in mind that once we get a shell, we need to upgrade it in a sense. All right, so now bind shells. Bind shells are less common but still very useful. Again, very true. All right, so on the left we have the attacker's computer, and on the right is our target computer. So here, I don't really like the way they do it because you can't really tell when they're running what, right? It's just kind of showing everything. But so on the target, meaning on this machine over here, we're going to go ahead and run this. Netcat, LVNP, port, whatever port you want. And you can see here they use port 8080. And they're going to execute command.exe. Okay, cool. And then on here, we're going to connect using port 8080. Okay, cool. So what that is, if for those of you wondering, is if you can run this on the target machine, on the attacker, or I mean on the machine we're attacking, this here, right? Then all we have to do with Netcat is whenever we're ready, we just say, hey, Netcat, go ahead and connect to this real quick. And it connects, and they've already got this going for us. So it's actually connecting to it as a listener, to the target as a listener, not connecting to you as a listener. So therefore, you could just, if you're done for the day, let's say you're done working for the day or whatever, you can just disconnect and you no longer have a connection there, but this is still waiting for you when you get back. So that's why it's nice to have. Just keep in mind that firewalls are a big prevention of that. Okay, so final concept, which is relevant in the task of interactivity. Shells can be interactive or non-interactive. So this is really important. Okay, this is what you're going to see a lot. Interactive shells. So if you've ever used PowerShell, Bash, Z shell, or any other standard client or command line interface environment that you will be used to interactivate shells, these will allow you to interact, blah, blah, blah. Okay, what's all that mean? It means this. These will allow you to interact with programs after executing them. So this is important, okay? For example, take SSH Login. So when you go to SSH, right? So the Bash shell is a interactive shell. So when I type in SSH, boom, boom, at localhost, it's going to pop this up. Are you sure you want to continue? Yes. You know, it's going to give us interactivity. It's going to say, hey, is this okay? Yes, it is. Cool. Thank you. You know, that's interactivity. Now, a non-interactive shell is going to do this. You can see here, you type SSH and nothing pops up. It doesn't give you anything back, okay? So what does that mean? It means it's non-interactive. It means you're limited to using programs that don't require user interaction. So that means SSH isn't going to work, okay? Now, a lot of times, another thing that's not going to work, you guys are going to get very frustrated when you're working like this because you're going to get non-interactive shells. When that happens, you can't tab complete. You can't Control C. So for those of you that don't know, Control C is a huge command in Linux. It lets you cancel whatever's running, right? The problem with that, with a non-interactive, is every time you hit Control C, it's going to cut the connection. It's going to cancel it because it's trying to cancel it on your personal machine, not on their machine, okay? So that's very important because what if you're running a process that you need to stop? Well, you can't Control C it, so you have to know whatever syntax is required to stop that command. So keep that stuff in mind. So here they're just telling you that you guys are going to read through this. That's why I'm skipping through it. But they're going to tell you that the listener is an alias they put in to do the Netcat listener for them. So this is what's going to run every single time they type listener. So anytime you see this listener here, that's what they're running. That's all they're saying. All right, so which type of shell connects back to listening ports on your computer? That's a reverse shell because you're connecting back. You've injected malicious code into a website. Is the shell you receive likely to be interactive? The answer is no, it's not likely to be interactive. You'll have to make it interactive. When you use a bind shell, would you execute a listener on the attacker or the target? So would the listener be on the target or you if you're using a bind shell? And we know that's going to be on the target, not on you. All right, so we're now for Netcat. All right, we already covered reverse shell. So in this, here's the syntax that I was covering before. Netcat L, that tells it to listen. V is verbose, meaning give us more output. The N tells them not to resolve host or DNS. It says explaining it is without the scope. You just don't need it. Okay, just know that you don't want it to resolve host names or use DNS because you don't want that traffic. P, port number. So that's obviously you need to tell it what port number. If you don't hit this L, by the way, if you guys don't put that there, if you, let's say you forget it, whatever, it's not going to try and listen. It's not going to be a listener. It's going to try and connect. So there's a big difference, okay? So here's an example of it. You'll use this all the time. If you don't use sudo, just heads up, you cannot use a port above 1024. So you can't use uncommon ports. That's a problem if you're trying to, use an uncommon port, which most people do because they don't want to use a port that's in use. Especially on these try hack me boxes, because it doesn't matter if you get caught, so you can use whatever port you want. All right, so bind shells here, it's just different. Bind shells, they already have it running on theirs, so this is how you connect. It's just Netcat, target IP, target port. That's it. So now, which option tells Netcat to listen? That's the L. How would you connect to a bind shell? That's just Netcat, IP, port. Boom. Simple. And it just connects. Okay. All right. So here's where we're covering the Netcat stabilization. I'm not worried about you guys knowing these syntaxes because they're throwing a lot of random syntaxes at you guys in this. I'm worried that you guys understand what they're doing, because you can find stable reverse shells if you do it, if you know what you're looking for. So technique 1 is Python. All right, so this is only applicable to Linux boxes because they have Python installed by default. Windows doesn't typically have Python installed by default, but it might. You never. I mean, if you know what the server's got on it, then it'll work. But first thing you're going to do is Python C import. So this is the first step. Okay, this is a 3-step process that they're walking you through. Now, the first step, what they're showing you here is this is going to spawn a bin bash shell, okay, which uses Python to spawn a better shell. Note that some targets may need the version Python specified. So this is common when you're using Python now, like on our attack box. I know it's Python 3, so you have to actually type Python 3 to get this to work, okay? At this point in our shell will look a little bit prettier. So as you see here, they run that. So what they did is they imported Python, and then they used Python to spawn the bin bash. Now, when they did that, you notice it changes colors, and it looks a little bit better, but we're still not there because you still can't auto tab, you still can't do a lot of that stuff. So now you have to export term equals xterm. This gives you access to term commands such as clear. So it gives you the same terminal commands. You're importing those commands basically that you already are used to, but they load automatically on your machine, but they're not loading automatically on a shell that you created, okay? So now, finally, most importantly, we're going to background it using Control-Z. So if you ever need to background anything, Metasploit does the same thing. Control-Z is common background, okay? Now, back in our own terminal, we're going to use this. STTY raw echo FG. Okay, so what does this do? It does 2 things. Turns off our terminal echo. So you notice when you type on your machine, you type, let's say like right here, they just type Python 3, tac C, blah, whatever. It shows it. Well, that's an echo. It's showing it back to you, okay? So that's the first thing it's going to do. So that gives us access to autocomplete, the arrow keys, and Control-C. Now, why does it do that? Because it's not trying to do it on your machine anymore. It's not pushing those buttons anymore at all. So then it will actually, and then the FG foreground will then actually bring the shell back up. So all that's doing is disabling that where it's trying to do it onto your machine and letting you actually interact with the shell. Now keep in mind, and they say it down here, but if that shell dies or you close it, you won't have any input on your screen because you turned it off, okay? So you got to type reset to do that. Now, I think personally there's better solutions out there than this, but this is a technique. What I mean by that is, for me, unless I'm going to be on this specific shell for 8-10 hours, I'm not going to do this, okay? I will use the less stable or the less friendly shell personally, but that's just me, or I'll use one of these easier methods, okay? So here's technique 2, RL wrap. So this is just a simple, it says it right here, which in simple terms gives us actually history, tab, auto completion, arrow keys immediately upon receiving a shell. However, some manual stabilization. Okay, so all it is, you use sudo apt install. So first you have to install it, okay? But you just RL wrap your Netcat listener, okay? And this will actually give you a better featured shell. Now the problem is you still have to do the same technique. So you still have to Control-Z and use this STTY raw tac echo. And the reason you do that, simple, it's so that when you hit Control C, those type of things, it's not actually trying to do it on your machine, it's trying to do it on theirs. Okay, SOCAT. Okay, so this is the easiest way, but keep in mind SOCAT only works on Linux machines typically. So it's important that you know that's about all you're going to do. Now, you have to get it onto their machine. That's a whole nother thing, right? So here they're using Python 3 HTTP server. This you've seen me use on this channel quite a bit. It's just a way to upload whatever directory you're in as a web server so people can download files from it. That's all they did, and then they requested it on the target machine, which sounds great, but that's not necessarily going to work every single time, right? All right, so then for the sake of completeness, in a Windows client environment, the same can be done with PowerShell, so you can get this onto a Windows machine and do the same thing. With any of the above techniques, it's useful to change the terminal size. So you guys should know you can change your terminal rows and columns. So if you open it, run stty tac a, it tells you how many rows and how many columns display on your actual terminal, and then here you can change it. Okay, this will just make it so that you can actually have full use of it. Pretty easy. Change the registered width and height of the terminal, thus allowing programs such as text editors, which rely on such information being accurate, to correctly open. All that means is if you don't change it and it's too small for, let's say, like you're trying to open a text editor or something like that, and it's too small, it's not going to open, so you just need it to be correct. So here, how would you change your terminal size to have 238 columns? Super easy, stty columns 238. Now, Python 3 web server, super easy also. I recommend you memorize this one because you're going to use it all the time in hacking. Sudo python 3 tac m http.server. I've used that more than probably any command, only because I can't tell you how many times I've been like, God, I got to get this file to you. Here, just do this. Just download it real fast. Okay. All right. So SOCAT. We're not going to. This video is already going on pretty long, so we're going to try and fly through this. All right. Similar to Netcat in some ways, but fundamentally different in others. Okay. So reverse shells. You can see the syntax starts getting a little bit more complex here, but not very hard. SOCAT TCP tac L for listener, and then the port. Now it's important that with this is the Netcat one, obviously, right? Well, with this you need to specify the TCP. Okay, so just keep that in mind. All right, so the resulting shell is unstable, but this will work. Okay, so that's fine. This is taking 2 points, listening port and standard input. So again, they're just basically saying this is the same equivalency as the Netcat listener. It's not stable yet. All right, so now we'd have to connect back using SOCAT, TCP, local IP, local port. And then we're going to execute PowerShell.exe. And then it says the pipes option is used to force PowerShell to use Unix-style standard input-output. So all that is saying that you are going to launch PowerShell and use pipes. Okay, cool. Again, I'm not expecting you to memorize that. I'm not worried about that. So here's the Linux target. So you can see it's the exact same thing, except for we're going to say bash tac li instead of this PowerShell, okay? And this is for the listener. These are just the syntaxes for this, guys. So it's not really, in my opinion, you don't need to memorize it. You're going to mess with it later. So all they're telling you guys is the syntax. So now here's some of the more powerful. So here's why you're actually using SOCAT versus Netcat, okay? So you can see here, here is a new listener syntax. So here, you're going to use your regular SOCAT, TCP tac L, port, okay? And then your file, you're going to specify the file as TTY, even though that's not a file, right? You're going to specify that file and then say raw echo equals 0. This will actually make that stable shell for you that you're looking for, okay? So here it's telling you it's equivalent to hitting the Control Z and doing this trick here. It does it for you. So if you have this SOCAT already installed and you want to do this, it will make it easier for you because you don't have to know all this other stuff. Now, again, unless you're going to be using this shell for long periods of time, I don't recommend doing this on a lot of Try Hack Me boxes, only because it's a waste of your time. You can do a lot of the Try Hack Me boxes without getting these more stable shells. I'm not saying don't know how to do this or don't have this in your back pocket at all times. I think you should know how to do this, and you should be able to pull it out at any point. But my point is, a lot of these machines don't take long enough to justify putting in all the extra work, okay? All right, so here, it's possible to upload a precompiled SOCAT binary which can be executed as normal. So what that means is if you actually uploaded this to the other machine, it would be executed normally, and just like you normally would. So here, execute bash. Okay, so they're adding some things here, and they're going to show you what it is. So PTY allocates a pseudo terminal on the target. Okay, it's part of the stabilization process, so that's important. STD makes sure the error message gets shown in the shell. So that is a problem with a lot of non-interactive shells. You might run something, it doesn't work, you don't get an error message, you don't know what's going on. SIG-INT passes the control C to allow us to kill commands inside the shell. That's very important. The set SID creates the process in a new session. That's important also, because if you take over a pre-existing process and it's not stable, you're going to be as stable as that process. Sane, stabilize the terminal, attempting to normalize it. So again, these are all ways to just stabilize that connection so that you don't lose the connection. Because once you get it, you need to keep it. Now, we're going to cover here in a second more of really the ways that I would recommend trying to keep it stable. But again, these are really important to know because every box is different. Some boxes you can just hop in there and you can get a stable shell real fast, and some you can't. So how would you get a SOCAT to listen on TCP port 88? Pretty easy, TCP TAC L 8080. Okay. Now, encrypted shells, this is pretty easy. I'm not going to cover every single syntax here again, but all this is you're going to use OpenSSL. You should know what that is. I'm not saying you should know how to do it, but know what it is. And basically, we're going to walk you through the process. What you have to do, you have to create a new key, okay, a new certificate. When you create that certificate, you're gonna have to add the certs together, create one file that you're gonna need to upload. When you do that, okay, now you're gonna have, excuse me, you're gonna have SOCAT use the cert file that you put together there, and then that's gonna be sent out and also be verified. Now you notice it says verify equals 0. The reason for that is because it's going to never be verified because of the fact that you created the cert and it's never being authorized by a certificate authority. That's why I don't want to dive deep into this, because if you're not familiar with how this works, then you're not going to understand what I'm talking about. But these are self-signed certs, meaning that no one is saying yes, these are genuine. So what it's going to do is it's still going to create a SSL connection. It's still going to be encrypted for you, but it's important that you understand that most places are not going to allow a target to create a connection based on an encryption certificate that's self-signed by someone they don't know, okay? Just know that. But keep in mind, if you can get this to work and you understand it, because I'll have you read through it and try it, but if you can get this to work, it's really important to know, because this will basically allow you to get a lot of information out of the machine and basically everything you do is encrypted. So therefore firewalls and stateful packet inspection and all that stuff can't do much because it's encrypted. They can't see what you're doing. So that's good to know. It does get around intrusion detection devices pretty well. The problem is getting it established initially with a self-signed cert. But either way, so here's the actual syntax for opening the SSL listener using the technique that they used before. So they want you to use the technique that they used previously, which is SOCAT, add the OpenSSL, listen on port 53. Then you have to add the cert file and the verify equals 0, file TTY, raw echo 0. That's the same thing as the one previously. And then if your IP is 10, blah, blah, blah. So here, same exact thing, verify equals 0, execute bask li, and then we have to set those little extra parameters that we covered in the last one. So that's, in my opinion, this is outside the scope of this because they're trying to show you what a shell is. And yes, it's important that you know how or what an encrypted shell is, but I don't think, unless you already are familiar with certificates, certificate authorities, encryption, things like that, I don't think that has to do with the shells themselves. I think it's important that you know it exists and they show it to you, which they did, but I don't think you need to memorize that just yet. I think you should focus on understanding certificates before you focus on that specific task. Okay, so common shell payloads. These are just showing you that there's binaries out there that can do this for you. Kali comes with them at user share Windows resources binary. Obviously here, Netcat, that's a bin bash shell. So that's its own payload technically. So these ones, MK50, temp F. Okay, so MK50, what that's going to do is that's going to create a pipe for us at temp F. Okay, think of a pipe as a file. That's all you got to think of it as. Okay, that's for this purpose. That's all you need to know. Okay, so Netcat. So you create the pipe, right? And then Netcat, you start Netcat on the port, and then you're telling it to use that pipe that you created and create a bin bash or a bin shell, excuse me. And then all you're doing is directing it to the pipe that you created. The 2 and 1 is just directing your errors, and then remove temp F. Okay, so what all is going on basically is what we're trying to figure out, right? So the first command creates a name pipe, which we just did. Okay, then it starts a Netcat listener and connects the input of the listener to the output of the pipe. Okay, so again, think of it as a file, not as a pipe. Okay, the output of the Netcat listener, the commands we send to it, is the output. So if I type ls or whatever, that is the output. Then gets piped directly into the shell. So we have that shell created, so it gets pumped directly into it, sending the actual output stream into the std out, and sending itself into the input. Basically, it's a big circle. That's what you need to know from it. I don't like the way they worded all that, but basically what they're doing here with this, the whole purpose of this, is this will create a pipe that then allows you to connect to the shell and sends the information back out. So you're sending it in, it's sending it out. Okay, it's a circle, it's a connection. That's what they're doing. Okay, that's all they're doing. But they make it sound much more complex than they need to, in my opinion. This here is the exact same command. The only difference they did is they got rid of, you can see, let's see, yeah, they got rid of the Netcat listener, and they added just the Netcat with no syntax, which is the connection. So it's the exact same thing, except for one is a bind shell, one's a reverse shell. All right, so now when targeting this video is going way too long. When targeting a Windows server is very common to, okay, so this again, I wouldn't expect you to memorize, but it's a PowerShell command, and this is a one-liner if you want to call it that, but basically you can copy and paste this and change the information, the IP and the ports, and this will actually spawn the reverse shell that you're looking for. So here we have a Netcat listener, and then we actually run this command on our target machine, and it reaches back and it actually gives you a reverse shell. This is important. I would recommend saving this somewhere because it's a really important reverse shell, because it's much harder to have a reverse shell on a Windows machine, especially spawning it from PowerShell, unless you really know what you're doing. So what command can be used to create a name pipe? MK50, we did that. This doesn't need a question. It just tells you to look through it. All right. So now Msf Venom. These ones, I'm not going to skip Msf Venom, but I am going to say we already covered this, so I'm going to go through it fast. We covered this last box, I believe. All right. So here, Msf Venom allows you to create payloads. Okay, that's cool. So we knew that already. So Msf Venom tag P for payload. You specify which one you want. So Windows 64 shell reverse TCP. Then the file, then that's an executable is what they want. And then the output is shell.exe. The host is you. So the L host is your listening IP, your listening port. So you'd start your reverse shell, and then you'd spawn this, and this would give you a file that you can run on the target. And when you run it, it's going to reach back to your reverse shell, okay? So that's awesome. So now, stage versus stageless payloads. Staged payloads are simple. Stage payload sends out a connection request, basically. They get that connection, they stage it, meaning they have the connection open, you're ready to go, and then they send the payload to do whatever you want to do. Stageless is not. Stageless is just a one, boom, we have a reverse shell because we just sent this to them and got a reverse shell. So keep that in mind. Staged establishes that connection but doesn't do anything, and then it sends the payload. Stageless sends the payload right away. All right, so Meterpreter, that is the tool that Metasploit uses to actually get the Meterpreter shell. When you get the Meterpreter shell, it has its own commands and things like that. So Msf Venom does that for you and gets you a Meterpreter session. These are payload naming conventions. You guys can read that. Like I said, we've already covered this before. So here, no answer needed. Which symbol is used to show that shell is stageless? It's the underscore. The staged has a /. Now, what command would you use for generated blah, 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 blah. So here, it's Msf Venom, TAC P, Linux, /x64, /Meterpreter, /reverse TCP, TAC F for file, executable, TAC O for what output, shell.elf, which is an executable on a actual Linux machine. And then L host is ours, and L port 443. Okay, so Metasploit multi-handler, not going to cover it. You guys can read it. We already covered this last box, but Metasploit multi-handler is a way to get a reverse shell into Metasploit, and it's basically Metasploit's listener. We'll just say that. All right, so now web shells. Web shells are very, very important, okay? Web shells are something you're going to use a lot. They're very cool, but they're much harder to figure out, okay? Well, in my opinion. So you can see here, PHP is the most common server-side scripting language. The reason I tell you that is because a lot of these are going to be written in PHP, because that's what a lot of server-side can take. So basically here they're showing you shell.php command equals ifconfig. So anything they put after that command will run and then tell you. So this is the ifconfig results. So this is a website, but they were able to actually get command execution using that website. So you could type any command here and get it to work. So you can see here, this would take forever if you're trying to get information, right? So what could we do? We could do command equals, and then we could put our reverse shell in there and have a listener and get a new shell. So think of it that way. This is a web shell. This is a shell, but you could use this to then get a better shell if you wanted. This is the exact same PowerShell command PowerShell reverse shell they used before. The difference is they URL encoded it. So theoretically, you could copy this and then put it right here after the command, and it would reach back and get a reverse shell using PowerShell on your machine. All right, so next steps. We have a reverse shell. What are we going to do? So here they're telling you what a lot of people will do is they're going to look for SSH keys stored for the user. So why would you do that? Because a lot of SSH keys, if you have it, you can log in using SSH using that other person's account. Okay, perfect. Now, if there's any vulnerabilities on the machine, like a writable shadow file or password file, we can easily manipulate that to then get passwords or change passwords, things like that. Another thing you can do is you can actually add your own user. So this is very common. Net user, username, password, add, and then add them to the local admins group on Windows. I recommend doing this first thing, but make sure you understand what you're doing, meaning don't put your name in there, right? Because if you put Bob and your name's Bob, they're going to be like, okay, a guy named Bob just hacked us, right? Make it look legit, make it look real, give it the exact same parameters as what they use, things like that. So if they use at yahoo.com for all their emails, make sure yours has that type of stuff, okay? So now practice and examples. I'm not going to cover these. These are the two boxes you can start and you can actually practice. And then here's the questions and some of the tips they're going to give you on what to do to get basically try out. There are no answers required for these. It's just a practice, but it's something you guys should definitely do. This is one of the boxes I think you really should practice because getting a shell is just the beginning, but it's also one of the hardest parts. It's kind of what everyone's going for. Once you have a shell, it's easy. You've got it. You figured it out. but getting a shell is usually the difficult part and what you're trying to accomplish. So hopefully you guys liked it. This was 45 minutes. I think this is our longest video. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it. 2 more videos and we are done, guys. So make sure we hit that like and subscribe button. We're going to try and hit 500 after the junior pen testing. So I really appreciate it and hope you guys have a great day.